Welcome to another episode of Exercise Matters with me, Randall Cooper.
And me, Mick Hughes.
Support for today's episode comes from Premax Performance Skincare. If you're active, you focus on strength, endurance and recovery. But what about your skin? Sweat, friction and the elements take a toll. That's where Premax comes in. High-performance skincare made for high-performance people. From recovery creams to anti-chafe balms, massage creams to exercise-specific barrier creams, we help your skin go the distance. Keep your skin as fit as your body with Premax. Available now at premax.co.
And support for today's episode also comes from Learn.Physio. Health professionals, are you staying ahead of the game? Learn.Physio brings you cutting-edge education from world-class experts in sports and musculoskeletal medicine. Online courses, hands-on practicals and expert resources, all backed by the latest evidence and designed to fit into your busy schedule. To be your best, learn from the best. Get started today at Learn.Physio. Hey mate, how are you?
We're back for episode 4 now of season 3, so we're kind of ticking on. I think we're over.
On us.
Yeah, I think we're over 50 episodes total now. So who knew we'd kind of got there? We thought we'd only last 3, but there we go.
That's really nice. We should have brought some non-alcoholic champagne out or something, and a few little party poppers or something. Maybe for episode 100 we'll call out the big guns and maybe even do a face-to-face podcast in a professional studio, mate. Call out all our bring out all the stops.
Yeah, we could have a party and record it. Yep.
There we go.
Yep.
We were just talking off there. Randall just noticed my Spurs t-shirt and wondered how long I'd been supporting the Spurs, and I told him I was a long time fan for a long time, but they just fell over the line. Well, it didn't quite cross the line this year. The New York Knicks got the job done.
Yeah,
proud supporter of Premax too. Yeah, you told me it must be the thing that keeps the Knicks going.
It's definitely a factor.
Yeah,
I'm proud. No, I'm not. I'm very proud of that we supply the team. We're definitely not a sponsor. We can't say that. But
no, you get fined. You get fined for that.
Yep.
How much Zone 5, Zone 6 training do you think those New York Knicks players do, mate?
I got a feeling they don't do a lot. You know, I'd be interested actually about profiling how basketballers, particularly in the NBA, kind of do any aerobic training. I mean, clearly they just must be able to go along in Zone 2 and 3 for a while, and, you know, there's a few of them who just obviously got pace and need it, but I don't think they touch kind of like into any threshold or high level at all. So I'd be interested to know how much they do. They probably do a little bit, but how much, I got no idea. We should ask someone.
What about that segue? Does the world class segue to the topic that we're going to talk on today, Zone 5, Zone 6 training? So
yeah.
I was actually fascinated to hear and see, like, during the World Cup, I was an avid watcher and purveyor of the World Cup soccer athletes, and Lionel Messi was the biggest walker during the game. They kind of profiled the amount of it actually, and obviously the completely different topic than what we'll talk about today, but it's fascinating how players can, in sporting codes, can kind of just drift and cruise through sport, and in soccer in particular there's a lot of walking done, even like those main strikers, even Haaland and Mo Salah and the big guys and big names. They spend an extraordinary amount of time just walking around the field, but when called upon to burst onto the scene and grab a goal and show that quick turn of pace, they're there for it. So it kind of intuitively makes sense. You don't want to be sort of bursting around the field and running around and just burning energy here, there and everywhere. You really want to control your own body's processes and leave your energy storage for those important vital moments where goals are to be had, especially a game like soccer where goals are often very hard to come by in some games. You want to make sure it's, you're there at the right time. So I wonder how much walking does get played in basketball. There's a lot of cruising around, not as much as soccer, obviously, but it was fascinating insight anyway.
Yeah, no, I agreed. I saw that stat as well. And then I looked at him. Once I read that, it's hard not to watch the guy, right? Because he's such a star, but you do watch him, and I suppose it's one of those markers of just like unbelievable athletes is that, particularly in a sport like soccer or basketball, is they just know when to push the button to go. And like the great Wayne Gretzky always said is I'm not, I need to be where the puck's going to be, not where it is now. And these guys know how to do that as well. And it's exciting when he gets it. But anyway, the World Cup final, he didn't play his greatest game and they lost.
No. We've had a luxury of sport in the last 6 to 8 weeks. So it's we're kind of like in this little lull period where every morning there's certainly not the luxury of just turning on the TV and having a sporting game of some description on. It's just have to wait for the Saturday, Sunday games of footy now, which is still absolutely fine. But we've had a really good run. And tennis, I imagine. Poor old tennis players didn't get much of a look at, and I barely heard a whisper about the French Open and the Wimbledon over the last So anyway, Zone 5, Zone 6, we're changing. We're actually probably going up a gear, as we said last time. You covered beautifully Zone 4. We've done Zone 2. We've looked at Zone 0, Zone 5 and 6, and we did talk on one of the very first episodes. We did talk about high intensity interval training as part of probably like a bigger topic and a bigger episode. Yeah, we want to probably get into the weeds a little bit more about high intensity training, and particularly Zone 5s and Zone 6s today. Yeah, meaty topic, and I think importantly, I want to sort of start by highlighting what Zone 5 is, what Zone 6 is, because they often do sort of get clumped in together as a high intensity interval session. But I will kind of break down what those are. Look at some of the research at elite level, general population, importantly special populations as well. There's a need and strong evidence in people with cardiac issues, diabetes, obesity. There's certainly special population groups who benefit from high intensity training, so Zone 5, Zone 6 training. But first actually, I want to address a pretty big elephant in the room, because I think when a lot of people do talk about high intensity interval training, there's certainly a bit of concern, maybe a bit of pushback about safety, because we are pushing the limits and stressing the heart in a very high way. Like, if we go back to what Zone 5 and Zone 6 training is, like Zone 5 training is effectively 100 to 120% of maximal heart rate ability, like we're at max heart rate capacity. So we are asking the body to really, and the heart to really work at a really high level. Zone 6, we're even asking it to go a little bit higher still. So there are certainly concerns about pushing someone's heart to maximal levels and certainly beyond. But the evidence is actually pretty thin when it comes to our cardiac concerns. And in fact, there's more concerns over musculoskeletal health and other parts of the body than the cardiac system. If we draw on a couple of papers before I get into some of the other stuff, but I definitely did want to highlight this early. Rogmo and colleagues in 2012 in Circulation journal and 40 cardiac patients during a supervised exercise program and ran and a study. And importantly, this isn't a healthy population. These people had established heart disease. They found one non-fatal cardiac event during the intervention period over 23,182 hours of high-intensity interval training. So one non-fatal event during this study. And for context, the moderate intensity group produced one fatal event per 130,000 exercise hours. So the conclusion was, from a fairly robust design, like 4,000, nearly 5,000 participants isn't a small number. It's certainly not hundreds of thousands of people, but it's certainly not a small group of 10 each in each group either. The conclusion was, in supervised cardiac rehab settings, cardiac events for high-intensity interval training is low, and certainly comparable to moderate intensity training. The key word here is supervised. I think that's the kind of caveat here, is when done in the right setting with the right people and the right, I guess, I can imagine these centres have got ECG monitoring, they've got heart rate monitors, they've got, everything there for a safety concern. They're the kind of situations where in a person that is looking to, maximise their health and well-being and reduce cardiac risk factors and get some cardiovascular fitness, then in a supervised way under the care of an exercise physiologist or a physiotherapist that specialise in cardiac rehab. High intensity interval training is certainly not a dirty word to be thrown around, and it certainly comes with a lot of benefit. And as I mentioned, musculoskeletal injury is often probably something that will more likely occur rather than the cardiac event. So I just want to get that out there early, because I think it's an important thing for us not to be fearful of in people.
You should still get
who would-
screened though, shouldn't you? I mean, I assume that in this study that most people who go into it have actually been screened before they start this
Absolutely.
exercise program. And even if they do have pathology at some level, that it is known what that is. And then, an exercise program is then prescribed accordingly, as opposed to someone who's sat on the couch for 20 years and just said, I'm going to relive my glory days of, when I was 21 and just goes for it. And that's when they could really get in trouble because you're dealing with something you don't know about potentially.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And that's like all good randomized control trials they'll have, particularly in those that are kind of working with special populations, they'll have a screening process where, people will be excluded because of certain conditions, included because of other factors. So yeah, it's a really important kind of asterisk there that if you are listening to this episode and you're thinking, oh, this could be for me, just make sure that, you see a GP first and make sure you get a referral to an exercise physiologist or an appropriately trained physiotherapist first before doing anything like that. Yeah, certainly worth noting. It's something that you can do in the right person with the right levels of supervision, but just wanted to let that out of the bag early, that it's not just for elite athletes and sort of healthy populations. It can actually be done very safely in cardiac patient and special populations too. So without further ado, want to sort of look at our zone 5 and 6 levels of training in elite sports first. We've got a nice meaty systematic review looking at the integration of high intensity work. We've got Yang and colleagues 2025 published in the BMC Sports Science, Medicine and Rehab journal. This was a rather large systematic review with 51 studies included. That included 1,260 athletes. The athletes were trained, so certainly already part of a regular training program, and did include adolescent athletes. However, there was not any indication as to how much female athletes were included in this study. What they did was quite interesting. They looked at and compared 3 different types of high intensity interval training. So we've got our classic high intensity interval training definition where it's probably actually leans in a little bit more to your zone 4 type work, where it's just sitting at or near 100%. With bouts under 10 minutes. So that certainly seems a little bit more of that threshold work you were talking about in the last episode. Then they looked at short sprint, so SIT, so sprint intensity training. So short all-out sprints, so less than 30 seconds of intensity, high intensity work with 2 to 4 minutes recovery. And then we got RST, which is very, very short maximal sprint, so only 3 to 7 seconds with 1 minute rest period. So we're talking at least 100% effort and 100% heart rate max, and then pushing above that as well. The results were across the board that all 3 of them improved VO2 max output, but there was no superiority across any of the 3 different types of methods. Adolescents responded just as well as adults, and what separated the outcomes between groups was their work to recovery structure. So it looked like the SIT group was probably a bit better geared because they get that nice long 2 to 4 minute rest recovery period. So we actually are tapping into something a bit more supramaximal than 100%. So we're asking them to go beyond their maximal effort and into 100% plus. Got that nice 2 to 4 minute window. So that was probably the thing that did stand out a little bit, but not a lot. So yeah, it was a nice way to start. And they did give an example of what a protocol may look like. So we talked about that before, the 30 seconds of all-out sprints. So that could be a sprint on a track. If you're running, it could be a 30-second sprint on a bike. It could be an all-out swim or any kind of physical work where you're getting your maximal effort out there for 30 seconds maximum, but get that recovery, at least 2 to 4 minutes to get your heart rate to come back down so you can give that all-out effort again. So yeah, that was a nice little way to start and a nice paper to get things rolling.
And just to recap, that was in trained elite athletes, not the general population. Is that right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. The general population's coming up soon. What's your you often ask me and give me a little bit of a hard time about my training, mate. What about yours when it comes to your high intensity interval training? Being a swimmer, how do you how much work do you get in this sort of higher intensity zone? How do you go about it?
Generally, I do three or four things regularly. So I do weight train 3, sometimes 4 times a week. I walk probably 4 or 5 times a week, but I do most of my cardiorespiratory training in the pool. And when I'm training hard, I'll be training 5 times a week. And most of the year, I'll probably train 3 times, sometimes 4 times a week. And I'll push all the zones. If anything, the way that I train with the squads that I swim with most often is we probably actually... But looking at it, we may just train just a little bit too much in zone 4 and not quite enough in zone 2. So sometimes I'll just pull myself out of those squads and just swim by myself and do a lot of easy training, just nice and slow swim and go for an hour and a half. And then I'll leave it to the squads where we do a lot of interval work. And I will get my heart rate up. I'll get my heart rate up to close to maxing out. I will say this, I just find it's harder to get there in the pool than it is kind of like on a bike or running. I just I can go as hard as I possibly can in the pool, and I'll probably get to 95% of my max heart rate. I'll never go past it in the pool, but I know that I've done some bike stuff, and I just blow up. So,
yeah. Do you think that's something you've just trained yourself to, or is that like a universal thing that, speaking to other people who mix and match and go between pool, bike and swim, run, pool and ride? Do they talk about similar things, or is it just something that you've sort of found within yourself from all your swimming?
I haven't spoken to the elites much about that specifically, but I know that with the guys and the girls that I train with, most of them will say the same as me, and that is that it's hard to get your heart rate up, to like right up the top end in redlining. But you can. There are some tricks, like if you actually got like fins and paddles and that kind of stuff, it's just an extra load, and that can kind of tip you up another 5%. But yeah, I think it's reasonably common across the board.
Yeah, nice. No, I haven't spent much time in the pool. I enjoy bike riding, but it's more bike stuff indoors and running. Yeah, always found running just blows me up straight away. I've never probably spent enough time in the pool to give it much. I certainly don't have any skin in the game when it comes to that. Okay. Well, moving on, an interesting authorship here for the second paper in a general population, Sloth and colleagues, 2013, talking about high intensity interval training, which was made me giggle a little bit when I saw the authors. And not only one, Sloth, Overguard, and Dalgus. So 2 sloths were included in this. So obviously maybe a husband-wife combo or brother relate. I don't know. I don't know
what would be funnier if they did a paper on sedentary behaviour or high intensity interval training.
But yeah, Sloth and colleagues, 2013. It was a systematic review, meta-analysis published in Scandinavian Journal of Medicine. Looking at, they included 19 studies of 440 participants, 34% women, and looking at, once again, high intensity interval training. This one being sprint interval training, so 10 to 30 second all out efforts, followed by at least 2 minutes rest, usually 2 to 4 minute rest. Interesting, a very low total volume per week. So looking at probably just once to twice a week. Sessions per week, and a program that lasted and a protocol that lasted at least 2 weeks and as many as 8 weeks. So remembering all these systematic reviews, they do pull the data from a number of studies. This one had 19 studies. So some of the publications and trials obviously some of them only had a 2-week protocol. Some of them ranged out to 8. But the overriding result here, and the headline result, was that VO2 max improved from as little as 4% to as high as 13% across the board with these parameters, these 10 to 30 second all-out efforts with as little as 1 to 2 exposures per week with a minimum of 2 to 18. So that was quite a nice finding there, and it gave us some parameters to work with how we can improve VO2 max. When we talk about the VO2 max here, changes of 4 to 13% across that period of time. An example protocol given here was the Wingate cycling session, where they do 4 to 6 repetitions of 30-second all-out efforts, 4 minutes of passive recovery, 2 to 3 times per week. So that was kind of like a nice, probably real-world example that could be applied to a general population. That wasn't elite athletes. This was healthy, sedentary or recreationally active adults, definitely not athletes, and 1 in 3 were female. So a probably real world example of how we could integrate some of this work to improve our VO2 max, which
that mirrors the Tabata kind of studies, from it was back in the 80s and 90s that we discussed that all the way back in the HIIT episode, I think. So
Yep. So it's kind of like, that, we talk about things in moderation. We talk about, people being time poor and then you talked about in that first episode that VO2 max is like a really key performance indicator for mortality. I forget the number. I think there was was it 1 MET rise was a 10 to 25% reduction in all-cause mortality, and 1 MET was 3.5.
Yeah. That was for kind of when you were going from low fitness to moderate fitness. So once you start getting fitter, like the gains get less, if that makes sense.
Tapers out.
But it was substantial.
Yeah, but nevertheless, like the time poor individuals who say I don't have an hour to exercise, this is your pushback where it's like, okay, yes, look, you got to get uncomfortable, and you probably need to have some piece of equipment that enables you, like an exercise bike or a stationary bike or a treadmill at home, or if you can go to the gym and just blast this out, you can sort of go in, go out, if that's your goal, is to sort of improve on your cardiovascular fitness, because this is going to be a game changer for your VO2 max. So nice real world example there in as little as 2 weeks, but obviously the longer the program, the better the gains. So I'd certainly be encouraging for programs that lasted at least 6 to 8 weeks if we're going to give a true longer lasting change. The third one in our kind of general population studies here was from another great authorship here, Bacon and colleagues, 2013.
Are you pulling our leg
studies
with these authors, Mick? We've gone from legit. Sloth to Bacon.
Sloth and Bacon, the high intensity interval work. 37 studies included 334 participants, once again about a third of them women, healthy sedentaries, recreational active adults, so very similar group compared to the sloth group. Now, the results from this trial were the VO2 max gains were better in the high intensity group compared to our moderate training group. So they did basically compare our short sprints, our high intensity work versus a moderate intensity group, and the VO2 max gains were superior to our standard program. So it's once again just another kind of paper that sings the praises of high intensity interval training and how we can improve that. Having this protocol, some intervals that were a little bit longer, and so it does allow us to sort of work with some different protocols. So the protocols that they used in this one were 4 to 6 rounds of 3 to 5 minutes at nearing 90%. So this is kind of sings a little bit more towards our friend Jan Helgerud, who championed the 4x4 protocol. Yeah. So it probably sits a little bit more in line with that. It's high intensity, but it's probably sitting just below our kind of 100% effort. So it's probably sitting up around that 90%. And arguably for a lot of people, that 90% of VO2 max or heart rate max, whichever kind of number you're using, or RPE, whichever metric you're using to guide the intensity, it's probably sitting a little bit below that true maximal all-out effort that you can only do for 30 seconds or less. This one's kind of encouraging you to go somewhere between 3 to 5 minutes for 4 to 6 rounds. Just some added fuel for the discussion anyway.
Where would you sit with this? I mean, if you've got someone who's like a patient of yours and just saying, can you give me some advice on, I want to do some high intensity training. I don't get my heart rate up that high that often. And you've looked at the studies that are looking at, 15 to 30 second bursts versus 3 to 5 minute bursts. Just straight off the bat, like if just someone said, I haven't done a lot of that training, I'm going to do it on a bike. Like after you've read what you've read, what would you suggest?
I'd probably suggest the 90, like the 4x4, or at least the 3 to 5 minute intervals, only because I think to get that 30-second like benefit of that really short and sharp interval training, like you have to be going super maximal, and probably a lot of lay people probably don't get there, so they probably are ordinarily probably sitting just a bit below 100%. So, you know, maybe the gains for the effort they're putting in probably may not be sort of tipping them into that, you know, true super maximal effort anyway. So maybe for me, I guess from a true programming sense would be to try and get them to drag out that higher effort, to try and get them to 3 minutes, and then give them that sort of 3 to 5 minute rest. And yes, it probably ends up being like a good 20-minute, half hour, probably closer to half hour session by the time you work through your 4 rounds or 5 rounds. But I think you probably end up getting what the results are that you're setting out to achieve. My concern is that if you're just asking someone to go all out for 30 seconds, they may not be tipping their intensity into that true all out, absolutely cooked here. Yeah. For someone that's untrained, that may not know their absolute limits yet, that would be the only kind of caveat there is why I'd go and lean that way. I'm not sure. Yeah. What do you think?
I'd do the same. I'd start off with longer reps. And mainly my concern would not be from a cardiac point of view, would be from a musculoskeletal point of view, is that if you haven't gone that hard and you're just going to go absolute super max for 30 seconds, if they're on a bike, I'd be worried about them doing the hip or their back or their hammy or something. So, yeah, I think you just need to train down. That would be the way I'd.
Yep, nice, good call. All right, so that's the elites and general populations ticked off. Just briefly here to kind of round out this one, special populations, I found some papers that talked about, or that showed benefit. We did talk about cardiac events earlier on, but Zhang and colleagues 2020 did a systematic review looking at high intensity training in overweight, obese, and patients with type 2 diabetes. A really interesting group. They did collected data from 19 randomized control trials with nearly 700 participants. Yeah, a lot with the comorbidities that we talked about before. Outcome measures they were looking at were VO2 max, and it was improved substantially over the course of the interventions employed. Triglycerides were significantly improved, but interestingly, when it came to BMI, body weight, blood pressure, blood glucose levels, they didn't change. There was no significant effect. So if changing body shape or changing some of the body chemistry is the goal, you're not, in what they found here in obese and type 2 diabetic patients, you're not going to achieve it with a high intensity interval training program from what they're seeing here in this very recent review from 2026. Interesting. It does, of course, improve VO2 max and improve triglyceride levels, but not maybe some of the other key important indicators there. So once again, might be part of your diet of exercise, but may not be the thing that you only bank on twice a week to get you there. Sounds like it's got to be part of like a bigger weekly exercise schedule.
They need strength training as part of that. So
Yep. So that's that one. Now, if we look at children and adolescents, we've had some nice improvements there from one of the earlier studies, but they did look at it again specifically.
How young was this population?
5 to 18-year-olds.
Wow. I can't imagine getting a 5 or 6 year old kind of doing Tabata intervals. Can you?
No. And it'd have to, I think the style of the program would have to be really fun. It'd have to be sort of fun. It'd have to be races or some kind of, I think it'd be incredibly hard to kind of even like put a label on the effort they're putting in. Because a lot of
kids do it though. That's the thing is it's like I remember back to when I was in grade 2 or whatever, and like I'd be sprinting around everywhere. That was just part of life. But to actually do it as a study and to get these kids, get them on a bike or run would be really weird.
Yeah. You'd definitely have some kind of play based thing. It'd have to be sprints. It'd have to be like fun based kind of thing. But then also too, for them to be, I guess, able to, probably let the person know what kind of effort they're putting in. Can you rely purely on heart rate measures, or, how are they kind of determining, are they getting up to their heart rate max? And is this obviously like this high intensity sprint based training, like that's going to be getting them there. So nevertheless, like it was a healthy bunch of children and adolescents. Any weight status was included, 5 to 18-year-olds. Once again, it was a fairly clear and consistent improvement across the board, comparable to adults. Blood biomarkers, or your glucose and insulin resistance factors all improved. Body composition improved, and blood pressures were kind of trivial there. From a children point of view, training kids zone 5, zone 6 kind of, there's definitely benefits there. I think kids are fairly robust creatures, where they often train probably zone 5, zone 6 as it were. It's just whether or not some of the kids maybe who've got developmental problems, or maybe have got some type 2 diabetes or type 1 diabetes, or some of those kind of kids we might just have to sort of tweak things there. But kids fine for zone 5, zone 6s. Cardiac problems here, just to sort of kind of recalibrate here. We've got a couple of protocols that was done. So if we look at the zone 5 and zone 6, we talked about Rogmo and colleagues that I talked about earlier on, the high intensity interval training protocol that they did compared to moderate training, they actually improved 18% of their VO2 max. So in a group that had coronary artery disease, they improved their VO2 max over the intervention by 18%. The moderate group only improved by 8%. So there's a double the gain potential if you do the higher intensity interval training, even in a supervised way in cardiac patients. Post infarction heart failure, so people that have had a heart attack. Wisloff and colleagues in 2007 did a protocol of 4x4, so similar to our friend Jan Helgerud's study design, 4x4 minutes at 90% peak heart rate, 3 minutes recovery, 3 sessions a week. They improved by 46% compared to 14% that did the moderate intensity training.
That's huge.
Stroke volume improved 17%, cardiac ejection improved 19%, and it was only the high intensity group that had that benefit. The moderate group didn't have those same benefits. So this is where the 4x4 protocol is certainly very, very good in supervised fashions, even in people that have had a heart attack or have got coronary artery disease. It's not just for our fit and healthies. So something to have a think about there.
Well, definitely for the exercise scientists, exercise professionals that are listening to this podcast. I mean, a lot of them may not work directly with cardiac patients. I'm sure the ones who do understand that, but it almost feels counterintuitive, doesn't it? That it's like you have a heart attack, you have an infarction, and it's like, don't go hard for a while, like really kind of take your time, and maybe you don't get up that high. But, that study just shows the complete opposite, that it's going to be to your advantage if you start to push it again.
Yep. Sometimes the poison is the antidote, right? So but obviously, supervised is the big underlined word there. So I found that fascinating, particularly some of that cardiac and special population stuff. And building on that, I think we've probably had some resistance across the board, and certainly myself, but having some concerns about cardiac. We talked about musculoskeletal risk. And when we're definitely getting into high intensity load, high intensity training, sprint training, really high intensity bouts, where we're placing a really high emphasis on eccentric loads on our muscles and tendons, so we're going to have a more likelihood of pinging tendons, tearing muscles. So that certainly needs to be appreciated as well if we're embarking on a high intensity interval training program. But as we've probably alluded to, even when we talked about with your zone 4 stuff, there certainly is an upper limit of prescription per week, which we want to talk about for a few minutes here. Is that, it does seem to be to 2 to 3 sessions a week seems to be the sort of sweet spot, probably about 2, depending on, for most people. If you're in the elite world, we're probably talking closer to 3. If we're in our general healthy population, average adults, probably hitting 2 is our probably sweet spot of number of sessions per week. And interestingly, in a study by Flockhart and colleagues 2021, in a 4-week progressive high-intensity interval training program, participants actually started to have impaired glucose tolerance, reduced insulin secretion, and reduced mitochondrial respiration as they worked through their program through weeks 1, week 2, week 3. And then in their deload week, their physiological responses recovered. So as the time goes on, there's probably windows where we need to periodize this type of training too. 2 to 3 times a week seems to be the sweet spot. But then also too, we need to make sure that we are planning these deload weeks, because it tends to come back and bite you in the bum if you just keep stacking and stacking and stacking. So that's something to be mindful of. And the period of time of intervention seems to be probably around about that 8 to 9 week mark. Seems to be the sweet spot for improvement over time. 2 weeks we saw, we get some marginal gains. 8 weeks we saw in one study where we got more gains, like 13% improvements in our VO2. So don't expect, to all of a sudden see your VO2 max shoot through the roof if you're doing 2 to 3 sessions over, 2 or 3 weeks. Sure, you might get some little gains, but we're in this for the long haul. So we need to probably have like a good 2-month block here to see a true change. So yeah, that's kind of zone 5, zone 6 in a nutshell, mate. How does that sit with you?
It all's consistent, from what I spoke about last week with zone 4. It's get there occasionally. 2 to 4 times a week, depending on whether you're just an amateur athlete wanting to keep fit versus an elite who'll be up the upper end of that spectrum. You need to get your heart rate high. You need to get it high for long enough, but you don't need to do more. Then that's my summation kind of from, the last 4 episodes basically, is that high intensity and getting your heart rate right up is very good for your health, and it's very good for your athletic performance, but it's dosage. You've got to get the dosage right.
Yep. Very true. Couldn't have said it better myself, mate. Well, that's a wrap for today's episode. Got anything else to add, mate? You happy with that? We'll call it a day.
Well, all I'll say is that we've been very, very cardiorespiratory focused for these last few episodes. We are going to change tact a little bit. Some episodes we've got coming up in the bank in the future is we're going to talk about concurrent training, tendons, protein again, gut health and athletic performance. We'll re-tackle peptides and Pilates. So we're going to kind of steer away from the aerobic stuff and get back into a little bit more of, I suppose, our wheelhouse, Mick, our bread and butter. Huh?
Yeah. But I've enjoyed this look at heart rate and different heart rate zones, and certainly the heart rate variability stuff that I tackled a couple of weeks ago, and definitely the VO2 max. I think this has been a good eye-opener for my own training and my own kind of appreciation of how my body's pulling up, particularly with that heart rate variability. I had definitely a misunderstanding of the numbers and what it all means. And now that I've educated myself, I've come out the other side with a better look at it. But yeah, absolutely keen to get back into probably our regular, probably more comfort zones. I like stepping out of the comfort zone for a little bit, but I'm looking forward to going back into my little physio-related bubble over the next few weeks.
Excellent. Well, that's awesome. Well done.
Well, that's a wrap. That's a wrap for today's episode of Exercise Matters. If you enjoyed the chat, make sure to subscribe, leave a review and share it with your mates. A quick disclaimer as always, particularly with this episode. This podcast is for educational purposes only and is not medical or individual advice. Always seek guidance from a qualified health professional for your specific needs. Big thanks to our sponsors, Premax, high performance skincare for high performance people, Learn.physio, world class education for health professionals. We'll catch you next week.
See you next week.